listeners, and welcome to High Tea Mystique with your hosts, Kat.
And I'm Tess.
And Pam.
In a world changing faster than the time it takes to brew a cup of tea,
High Tea Mystique reminds you that no experience is too big or too small to teach us something about ourselves.
So join us for a cup of tea as we steep into adulting, womanhood, independence, and more.
So we were just talking about, this weather sucks, but also kind of like, scary vibes.
Yeah.
Oh, very scary vibes.
Very terrifying.
I was just having a conversation with someone that told me that the time of hurricanes is kind of enjoyable for them because the chaos feels a little bit soothing, And I feel like I was like, okay, all right. I can kind of relate to that where it's like, okay, everybody is panicking. So when you panic, your internal panic feels a little bit less, but I still don't want to live through a hurricane.
It's almost like a group trauma release, but also like it's happening at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that I know that I'm getting older when yesterday I left work and I was like, oh my God, I need to get gas. I need to get gas. And every gas station was available. There were no lines anywhere. And I was like, wow, I'm my grandmother. Like, I'm my grandmother who's freaking out about something before anyone else is. Like no one else thinks this is an issue yet. It's just me. And I'm like, oh, that's going to take an hour. I call my boyfriend and I'm like, I'm going to get home at some point, but I need to get gas. I'm going to make sure that I do this because who knows what's going to happen. And I was like, oh, that gas station's available. Oh, there's no line at all. Oh, okay. I'll just go to the one by our house then. Like the process of getting to it was just insane. But also I feel like to what Tess was saying, you know where to find the frantic energy. It's
True.
usually at the gas station or at Home Depot or in the paper section of Publix, or the water aisle. Like, if you want it, it's out there.
Yeah, I also think maybe like the timing of that, you got lucky because I went out not too long ago and Home Depot was crazy and the gas stations were getting up to that level. And for those of you that are listening to us, and maybe this is later into the future where you're not sure what's going on, we're talking about Hurricane Milton that we are anxiously awaiting to hit Florida, all of Florida. And it's an interesting time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we thought it would be a great time, not because of the hurricane, but because it's October, to really dive into our spooky era season part for our podcast and talk about some scary, spooky stories. Yes, maybe we'll get a visit from Casper and he'll help calm us down.
Nope.
Oh,
nope.
Snap.
Nope.
I don't want that friendly ghost.
We can take it.
Yeah. So before we start, as you can see, if you're watching us on Spotify or YouTube, we are meeting virtually for this episode, and we each brought our own tea. I have to change hands with our own mug. I'm using a cute little, it's a little hard to see with this immersion, but Beetlejuice themed mug. And
so perfect.
Yes, perfect for this episode. And I guess I'll start and introduce the tea that I'm drinking. I was looking through my little cabinet pantry thing where I have all of my teas, and I saw this tea bag that I had been curious about for a while. It was really calling to me today. And so the tea that I'm drinking today is called Uña de Gato, or cat's claw in English. And this is actually a Peruvian tea. So shout out to my Latino heritage.
Your roots.
Yes. And upon research, I found out that this plant was used as and is used as a traditional medicine to relieve bone, gastrointestinal, and joint pain. So which I think there was a reason why it called to me, because my wrist has been hurting a little bit. So hopefully that'll help me relieve some of that pain. It has anti-inflammatory properties, and a little kind of side note that they put on this Therascience website that talks about this tea is it is a contraceptive and has abortive properties, so it's a little bit of a warning for women who are pregnant um, to not use it. But the main benefits for this is to help keep your joints nice and healthy and also strengthen the immune system. So my body clearly knew what it needed, and that's what I'm drinking tonight, which is when we're recording. I guess I'll go over here to my left side.
Plot twist.
Here, I thought it was my right, but Zoom.
Zoom does love to do that. Zoom really does love to do that.
Go ahead,
Reception.
Kat.
That's fun for the people watching. That's fun for the people not watching. I hope it's more fun.
Imagine it, me turning my head one way and thinking, I got tricked.
Dramatically too. Very
Gotcha.
dramatic.
So does that mean I'm talking about my tea?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. As chance would have it. As fate would have it. Well, I'm drinking the spookiest tea that I have. And that's because of its hue. The hue of this tea, I don't know, man. I don't know if my camera's gonna be able to catch this, but if you can see it, it has like a bluish green, kind of like a deep teal tone. And that's because the tea contains 4 main ingredients, and magnesium is actually added to this. And it has valerian root, passion flower, which it gets its color from, as well as blackberry and lemon. And so I love this tea. It's something that I love to have when winding down for the day. Definitely drink it warm every time. And I thought that a nice way to describe it for the spooky season would be that it's a tea that treats insomnia, right? So during these times when you're doing your back-to-back horror flicks and going to haunted houses and going to scary parties and just immersing yourself in darkness, and in the spooky things and those ideas that lurk a little bit longer, this is a tea that can really help aid you so that you can just enjoy the season and still be able to sleep really well. So it's ultimately it's an incredible sleepy time tea. And all of these ingredients benefit and treat insomnia, ADHD. They help the body and brain to just regulate and slow down. And something that I thought was also cool is that blackberry specifically helps with skin because of the antioxidants that are inside. So it's also like it puts you to sleep and helps beautify your skin. So a nice little blend of benefits there.
You said that was blackberry?
Blackberry.
Good to know.
Yeah, right. And the color is just gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
Tasty. Naturally sweet too, since it has blackberry. Well, bitter, but still sweet.
It looks like an elixir.
I know. Imagine if I could put a little bit of edible glitter inside. Girl,
The
we
next
do have a
tea.
party to plan, so
Mhm.
Ooh.
but I'm not trying to put anybody to bed. So we'll see.
So, we'll add the blackberry, remove the other sleepy things.
There we go. That's a perfect
All right.
plan.
Now I'm gonna turn to my right. I know the test.
Oh, thank you, Pam. Thank you for your turns. They're very much appreciated.
It's all about the immersion, you know.
Oh, the immersion. Well, today I actually have a revisiting friend of ours that we've had before on the show, Egyptian licorice. Truthfully, every time I think of Egyptian licorice now, I remember the fact that, well, the kind of uncovering of its risk of having too much Egyptian licorice and it kind of causing problems with your heart. So, in a weird, dark, macabre way, I was like, yes, that is what I will drink today. I will test my limits and my mortality with Egyptian licorice. So that's what I'm drinking today. And it is, a wonderful tasting tea, albeit its life-threatening contributions.
What are you gonna say, Kat?
No, I was just gonna say that it's she could be poisoning herself. Who's to say?
Who's to say?
But if she survives, she's a witch.
Definitely. Oh, definitely. I
Burn her.
mean, since the first day I knew.
All right. So thank you so much for sharing your teas, ladies. Um, so by the title of this episode, you might have a guess. Creepy pastas. We're going to talk about a little bit of spooky, scary stories, ghost stories that we know. And we're also planning on sharing some personal ones as well. So I figured for the first section of this episode, I wanted to share some local stories that each of us kind of know, um, whether it be ghost stories, haunting stories, whatever it is. And I will just go ahead and start us off. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode is because fairly recently, I had an old coworker, her daughter came in and we were kind of experimenting with this podcast room that I have at work that I helped create. And we were kind of doing a pretend podcast. And during that pretend podcast, she shared with me the story of Robert the doll. And I thought this was something she had made up until she reiterated and reminded me that no, this is an actual doll that lives in Key West. So this is very local to, where we are. And basically, this doll, and I'm just going to grab the story straight from the website so that I don't, butcher anything because I haven't done the trip itself, but you can visit this doll in East Martello Fort in Key West. So basically, the story of Robert the Doll dates back to the early 1900s when a young boy named Eugene Robert Otto was given a one of a kind handmade doll that was made by a servant that worked for his parents. And the kid basically got super attached to the doll really quickly, became really close friends. But then some strange, scary things started happening. And here the story goes that the first hint that something was out of the ordinary, that something out of the ordinary was happening was one night when Eugene, who was only 10 years old, awoke to find Robert the doll sitting at the end of his bed, staring at him. Moments later, his mother was awakened by Eugene's screams for help and the sounds of furniture being overturned in her son's room. Eugene cried for help, begging his mother to rescue him. When she was finally able to wrench the locked door open, she saw poor Eugene curled up in fear on his bed, his room in shambles, and Robert the doll sitting at the foot of this bed. Eugene would say, "Robert did it." Those were the only words that he could get out. The same words that he would use later many times throughout his childhood whenever something strange and mysterious or destructive would happen. So, in terms of whether this actually happened or not, nobody knows for sure, or why or how this dog could have actually caused all of this chaos in poor Eugene's room, and if anything had happened because it is a doll. Um, but apparently that wasn't the only incident. So later on, Eugene's parents would often hear him upstairs talking to the doll and getting a response back in a completely different voice. They reported seeing the doll speak and witnessing his expression change, giggling, and sightings of Robert running up the steps and staring out the window. The upstairs window were also reported. And, even after all of this, Eugene still kept the doll. And they basically lived together throughout his whole entire lifetime. After Gene's parents died, he moved back into their home with the wife, and he decided that the doll needed a place of his own, a room of his own, upstairs in the window that was overlooking the street. Um, his wife felt uneasy with Robert the doll in the house, and although she couldn't put her finger on it, she wanted Eugene to lock the doll up in the attic where he wouldn't do any harm. So Eugene had conceded, and as one could imagine, the doll was not happy with his new living situation. So soon, visitors from the home heard footsteps in the attic and sounds of someone pacing back and forth and almost like evil, devilish giggles. And neighborhood children also reported seeing Robert watching them from the window upstairs in the bedroom and told accounts of how the doll was actually mocking them as they walked to school. And now, basically, what the story is that she told me, right, that they told her during her visit, is if you go to see Robert the doll, you kind of have to ask him to take a picture, you know? And I'm not sure how you get a sign, whether it's okay or not. But basically, you have to make sure that you ask because if not, he'll technically haunt you. And there are stories that people will try to take a picture of Robert the doll, but it won't show up, or it'll show up and all of a sudden their camera goes dead. You know, the technical mechanics of the technology goes haywire, and that is basically the story of Robert the doll. And this was the first time that I had heard of it. I was sharing a little bit before we were recording what it was that I was going to talk about. Tess said that she had heard this story before.
Yes, I had. So honestly, I think this came up several points in my childhood, honestly. I had a I think it was like a really it's like Floridian folklore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the story of the family that owned him changes so much, right? But it's consistent that it was, aristocracy in Key West, and he had a boy owner. So those are like the consistent keys. Haha, pun there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fun thing is also that uh I was the first thing I was gonna say, if you hadn't said it, Pam, was if you ever think about visiting Robert the Doll in Key West, in the museum that he sits in, is that you have to ask permission of him to do anything. So I had a friend who, I was telling the girls that she lived she had a family who owned a trailer in Key West, and they would vacation there, spend weekends in Key West, the whole shebang. They would spend Halloween down there. And there's this kind of ceremony, this kind of cult completely dedicated to Robert the Doll around Halloween time. So it is a story. It's very seated into the culture of Key West. It's a
Mm.
small and where he's at, he is in Key West. Like he sits pretty much at one of the epicenters of tourism. So, there's a lot of love, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of, respect, understanding, interpretation to who he is before, or to who he was before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what are his effects. There's lots of stories and there's lots of letters that are mailed to him because there are people that are asking his forgiveness because they didn't do what they were told, and they took a photo, or they, made fun of him, right, around his glass box, and they went home and they got followed. So they will write letters of forgiveness. And I remember my friend telling me that um, they actually read one out loud to her in the museum. And they said, like, yeah, like this was sent 2 weeks ago. And it was a man detailing that, he's been seeing the doll in the mirrors of his home and he lived in Connecticut. So it was, it gives me goosebumps even talking about it now. I've never visited the doll, and that's with good reason. I've even been kind of afraid to like Google photos of him, but I have because, curiosity was killing me. But it's even said that, some people like in the in the forums that existed long ago, I don't even know. It wasn't Reddit. It was probably MySpace or Facebook, or I don't know, a combination of the two. have
Those
written
old chain letters.
yes, these strands of conversation of people just detailing their experiences of they've never been to Key West, right? They've never been in front of the doll, but they just made fun of him, right? And said something and they really felt like that followed him, right? That followed them to wherever they were, in the continental US. So,
Yeah, part of on the website, part of like the story, at least on that website of Robert the Doll, is that the doll was given as a gift, but almost as a spiteful gift from their servant because she was mistreated. And so she kind of cursed the doll with voodoo and I believe they said black magic on the website. One of the things that I just thought about that I would like to talk about and expand on a little bit is this idea of like even when, right, my coworker's daughter told me about this story, I personally, I don't know about you guys, would love to hear, have such a profound respect for anything potentially supernatural because you really don't know what's out there, you know? And so I think it's so important to respect, like, even if it's something that may seem like a silly story, like as Tess was saying, like this is part of Key West culture, really, like it's a part of their their growing up. It's something that I'm sure that they look forward to every single year and to celebrate. And so when those people come in and start mocking, I almost feel like it's Robert's right, to haunt them because it's something that I even think about in terms of other folk, folk stories and other kinds of uh ghostly stories, stories about spirits. Like at the end of the day, part of those stories, they have some sort of root, some sort of significance in that culture, right? And so I just think it's an interesting thought that I was processing of how there is a certain group of people that will take those spiritual stories for granted, and will kind of poke at them and then start seeing certain things or start feeling certain things, whether it be their own paranoia or actual hauntings. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
true. And also the kind of uh celebration of history because even though like let's say you're not too sure about crediting whatever story is told here, but no matter, which is why I love going on ghost tours and on walking tours, bus tours, whatever it be, there's so much history that you kind of find out through the proxy of listening to a ghost story that it's incredible. Like, the wealth of, Afro-Caribbean, you know, belief systems I have learned from honestly being on ghost tours around Coconut Grove. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so who wants to go next to share their creepy pasta?
I can share mine.
Okay.
I would like to say hello. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening today. And I'm going to preface this with a reminder that I was raised very religious. And so I I wasn't exposed to a lot of things that were scary for a very long time. So I also think that my perception of what was scary uh, was just so different. Um, so like I would say that through my childhood, the only real scary stories that I was exposed to were the ones that everybody was exposed to that were used to like ultimately just tease, like stories of Bloody Mary and the guy with the rabbit head that would be in your shower. Like I don't even remember his name. Um, but there is one story, and I wonder if Pam actually knows this because she knows the person. Tess does too, actually. But this is somebody's scary story. That was the first time that like I was in high school, and when I heard this person's experience, I definitely doubted them until maybe like the third time that I went to their house and just felt an energy um, that I had never really felt before, and it made me question. uh it made me question something for the first time, because I think I didn't believe in that spirits could be other people. I thought spirits were angels or devils, and I never thought of the concept of past lives as being real, and that there would be spirits who can linger, throughout. And those are things that I think I'm growing into believing more today, right? So this was kind of like the inciting moment for that. And one of the only. And it was that a friend, someone I knew in high school, had a home. And the home, they were not the first owners. And what's interesting about the home is that the home is not too old. Maybe was built in the 70s, like late 70s, early 80s, 1970s, 1980s, really not an old home, but that it had a previous owner, and that the previous owner, the home did go because there was a death in the home, and that it was the couple, and that I believe the husband murdered the wife, or the wife murdered the husband, and they were newlyweds. And so hadn't been together for very long when this happened. And so this person told me that there were many encounters from their parents first, of just like late nights, walking through the hallways and hearing footsteps, like hearing very, very slow patters, of footsteps up and down the stairs, and that it would go on for quite a while. They would look and not see anything. And then over time in the house, because they did live in the house and lived in the house for many years, and the experiences became a little bit longer and a little bit louder, and they would sometimes hear cries at the end of the stairwell on the first floor, almost like beckoning you to go down. And that by the time this person was in high school, had seen her on a rainy night in the hallway in a wedding dress, weeping, and that the vision was just like absolutely terrifying. And they had somebody come into the home, to try to cleanse the home, because it felt so real, that it really did occur. And because of all of the previous history in the home, that this was something that was real, and that multiple family members had experienced it. This person had a very best friend who had also experienced something similar. And it was like an epic experience, and they needed to try to treat the home. And when the person told me that, I was like, okay, sure. Like, that just sounds like BS, but I think when you really consider it, kind of like what Pam was talking about with reference to culture, I think it's the idea of who can know someone's home and life and experience better than that person. And when the experience is shared with so many others who can really relate to each other over it, I would say it's more ignorant of other people, to not recognize others' truth. And so, like, coming into that realization, I don't remember what time it was that I was at the house, and had to do something alone, and like the memory of the moment and the energy, of like almost like the room, just everything being sucked out of the room, like there's no air. It's a very crazy feeling, and I think it's awareness more than anything else, of that you are not alone, and that there are other universes that are occurring at the same time, and we only have access to one. Well, I know that we are dense. We are very spiritually dense, and there are a lot of things that happen to us that make us that way. So I guess technically we could have access to these other dimensions the way that other people do, and that's what's so interesting to hear these stories, because I do think that there are people among us who just have a clearer head, to recognize what is going on around us more than what we see. It's really interesting.
I don't think I've heard that one.
No?
No.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you who it is after the episode.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see.
Yeah.
Now we're so excited.
You guys might have been to their house.
It's interesting how you describe that feeling of being in that presence. Um, because I've never, unfortunately, had, or I guess fortunately, depending on how you see it,
Fortunately.
um, have an experience, with a spirit or anything like that. But I don't think what you described would have been would have ever crossed my mind, of how that interaction would feel potentially. So that's kind of insane to me that it's almost like you can't breathe and you feel, I assume, almost like,
Like frozen.
but yeah, or in a black hole or like in space where it's like there's absolutely no air, like suctions out.
Oof. That makes me think of Get Out, the sunken place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very much so like that. Yeah, like you just get sucked out and like forced into this space,
Mm-hmm.
and you just can't there's no room to doubt because it is real in that
Yeah.
moment.
That helps me also like process when people say it's a different plane, right? It's or those visuals that you see in supernatural film or whatever,
Mm,
um, that it's almost like being sucked in or through a portal or a vortex. So that is really interesting.
yeah. Yeah, and I was considering like other ones and I was like I think they all bleed into more of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm excited to share a
Okay.
little later.
So now, did I get it right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, you did. Let's go.
Tess.
We got the angles, baby.
Oh yeah.
Uh, oh yeah. So I think my kind of mm, I guess ghost story that comes from, Miami and the places that I've lived and what I've heard from is it probably has to do with the Coconut Grove Playhouse.
Mm,
Yeah. So
mm,
for some
mm.
context here, yeah, I know, girl. We're about to get into it.
That's awesome.
I went to high school right by the Coconut Grove Playhouse. Once upon a time, there used to be a charter school that was quite literally, maybe around the corner from the Playhouse. And we could actually get to the Playhouse faster from the back of the school because it was pretty much just a chain link fence in between the Playhouse and the school. And we is way too many, but it's okay. I'm gonna stay organized, I promise. Anyway, yeah, there was only a chain link fence separating the playhouse from my high school from, behind. And, that charter school was a charter school of the arts. It was called Academy of Arts and Mind. It's closed down now. It's actually still in Coconut Grove to this day. I think I passed by it recently and I actually pointed to it like, oh yeah, it's all graffitied up. It's actually quite spooky, the school itself, because it's completely abandoned and everything that was of the school was left there, so the desks, the chairs, the notepads, the art supplies, it's all there. It's also broken into because students have actually tried to get things from the school, and I'm sure homeless people and people that want to steal property have done that too. But anyway, once upon a time, the school was active and thriving, and there were many students a part of it. And I started attending the school when I was a sophomore, and I graduated from there. And all throughout my years attending that school, it was a known fact that if you spent time in the playhouse, you were cool. You had done something amazing. The playhouse, it is a historic building, right? It is like registered historic building, but that's the sad part is that because it's a historical building, nothing can really be done with it. And nothing has been done with it. It's like barred up, chain linked, closed, but the owners can't do anything to it because again, it's marked a historical site. And of course, that has kind of been a playground of multitude of things and forces that have met there in that place. But of course, originally, it was a theater, it was a place of entertainment, it was a place of the arts. So there's, things in there that, of course, pay homage to actors and, stage sets and things that, of course, you know, naturally set the mind wildly in the realm of imagination. So, one time I remember a few kids in my grade wanted to skip class and they wanted to break into the art house and they wanted to, go in there because we were theater kids, by the way. We were all part of the same theater troupe. And they were joking, saying that they were going to go get supplies and bring it over to our theater. And I remember in class, my theater professor, who, by the way, this man believed in superstition. He believed in so many things, carrying over energies and forces. And, he would tell you straight up, like, I don't want that. I don't know where that's been. I don't know what it carries. So my theater teacher actually overheard them talking about it. And he said to them, I don't want any of that in this theater. And he's talking about our high school theater, right? That was part of the building. Um, and they were like, "Are you sure we're gonna go see if there's anything that works?" Because we were doing a show around that time, and we were looking for like props and things for the set. And he was like, "No, no, never. Even if we had nothing else, never." So of course that didn't stop them because let's be real, kids were just gonna do it because the thrill of it. And they broke in and they did it after school. So, I think it was probably around March, very beginning of the year, but kind of towards the end of the school year, towards the approach of our like debut date for the show. And the the friends that, I had seen go off and, they left and we saw them maybe an hour and some later. We had gone out of rehearsal. They were there and they were waiting outside for their parents and we had asked them, "Hey, did you do it? How'd it go?" And it was me and my entire theater troupe. And they said, "Oh yeah, yeah, we got some stuff and we left it in the garage because, like they were pointing to the professor, like professor didn't want us to bring it up, so we're gonna take it home, but not today." And I'm like, okay. So fast forward to the next day, the next school day, right? They actually were, and these were two boys, by the way, two boys who left, came back to the school, left the stuff they retrieved in the garage, and then went home, came back the next day, and the two boys were actually raving. And by the way, this is a small school. You can imagine. It was a shopping plaza size of a school. So if somebody got upset, everybody knew because it was basically an amphitheater. Everything happened in the center, so everybody saw. And they were complaining that somebody had like thrown away the stuff. Somebody had taken it, somebody had stolen it, and it was gone. And the funny thing is that, you know, we know that the garage pretty much closes well before, right? We leave for rehearsal. So we know that nobody is really able to get into the garage, right? And like take out the trash, for example, right? Because it's a big dump site and there has to be a truck to come in, retrieve it, then put it back. And we know for sure that that didn't happen because the dump was still there, right? And it was full, so nothing had come in, nothing had unlocked the gate, you know. And we're talking about the back of the building. And we know that it wasn't thrown away because the dump was very accessible and they couldn't find it anywhere. The two boys had actually jumped in and tried looking for everything. And they were really pissed off and they thought, maybe somebody like from the street had come by and like moved it or whatever. And it's funny because they aren't the first person or first people to try and pull that prank, right? Lots of students in that school would break into the art house, try and do something, right? And most of them just left out with like, "Ooh, it's a weird vibe. It's a dark building." I felt chills down my spine. Some of them are like, I felt something, I saw something, right? And then there's these guys that went in there, took stuff, came back, and are upset that it's gone. And there was one girl who was like, you don't take anything from the art house. And she was telling a story of her friends who did the same thing, and they actually saw, you know, someone, right, in a reflection, and they turned around and they heard a scream of basically saying like mine, 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 mine. It was just a scream of someone repeating the word mine, mine, mine. So that, I guess, interpretively was like, that's why you don't take anything from the art house. That's why you don't take anything from the art house. And honestly, when this whole was happening, I didn't know anything about the art house. I had just started there. I just started going to school there. So it was very much like, okay, it's an abandoned building. I guess that's why kids break in, right? Because it's cool and, kids do weird things to get a thrill. But I had actually learned about it because my theater professor kept on talking about it. He kept on talking about how old it was, how much darkness it had attracted, and he's a very superstitious man. So he was very vocal about like, you don't go there, you don't spend time there, you don't know what's consuming you over there. And I was like, this is really intense. So I found out more about it very much in passing, and of course because nobody ever really found out what happened to the props and the things that they had brought over. And by the way, the things that they had brought over were pretty like hefty. We only saw them from a distance because of course they just pointed at it kind of like at the bottom of a garage. But it was like a big mirror with a very ornate frame. There were like several hats. There was this big plank that had a symbol on it that to this day I was like, that looks weird. And it was gone. It was gone. And I have to also emphasize that could it have been a custodian? Sure. Could it have been the police? Sure. But I feel like there's just something about it that is, again, connected to what the art house stands for, right? It's a dark space that does not attract positive energy. When you're there, you feel that kind of hot lacking of oxygen that you feel when you're like in a room with something. And even when you're looking outside of it and you're just looking up at a window, there's this notorious window that actually faced our school that had curtains blowing out of it constantly, constantly. And my theater professor would always say that, there's something like there can't be a fan in there at all times. Like it's not even windy, there's nothing going on. That's why you don't mess with it. And I was just thinking like, oh, that's silly because, it's a window, it's open, it's Florida, it's elevated. Of course there'll be things blowing, right? Um and then there's the story of people seeing things from that window, right? There's stories of people saying that they see faces, they see, signs illuminate from the window, they see creatures and um, eyes. So it's a very like distinguished place in Coconut Grove. Um, if you actually, look up like Miami haunts, the Coconut Grove Playhouse is one of them, and it'll tell you more about the kind of like police activity that's been around the building where they've had to kick out like, voodoo practitioners, biker gangs, because all of them are trying to commit some sort of dark alternative, practice. And it's all been centered at the Playhouse. So that was just interesting to be so close in proximity to it as a high schooler. And being someone who has never really gone inside, I've maybe looked up at the window, felt something weird, looked away. I've been by the front, of the building. I've been, pretty much in passing around it just because I was a high schooler and I walked around in the area. And I always was very aware of it. And sometimes, even when I wasn't aware of it, I was always aware of that corner and getting close to that area because it always felt really cold. and just something was watching you as soon as you entered a certain perimeter. Um, and that's just a fun, spooky thought to have, especially, as someone who was there every day, and you'd think, oh, it becomes numb to you. I think it actually became a little bit more high end because even as a senior, when nobody really cared about the playhouse anymore, right? It was rumored to have been torn down, right? There were so many things surrounding it, and somehow it still stands, right? We had heard that it was going to be, refurbished and opened up again to the public so that it could, kind of hold its value as an improv theater. Like once again, never happened. So whatever it is, it remains a threshold, right? It remains abandoned, it remains planked up, and it remains as a spot of one of the Miami ghost tours that are walking around Coconut Grove. So that's always interesting.
Hearing all of our stories really, it reminds me a lot of this manga slash anime called Mob Psycho. And basically, the story behind that manga is it's I think he's 13, 10, something like that, 12 maybe. Um, like a 10 to 13-year-old boy who's in school, and he basically has these abnormally strong supernatural psychoactive powers. But and so as the story goes along, he works with a con artist who sells himself as a spiritual cleanser, spiritual person who can get rid of curses, get rid of ghosts, all of that. But what's interesting to me is that a lot of the spirits, right, and the ghosts that are featured in that anime and in that manga kind of revolve around the same idea, right? It's an abandoned place, or it's something where the collective people around it, their fear has added to that energy, right? Like they're the all of the gossiping of these rumors, they add power to that spirit, to that energy that is haunting whatever it is. And I think that just people talking about that space, right? Or people visiting, or those voodoo practitioners or biker gangs wanting to try to do whatever they were doing, around that space. I totally believe the idea that all of this energy builds up, and kind of collects in that space, because I'm somebody who personally believes in energy, right? And if I can feel energetically drained from someone, who's to say, or revived from someone, who's to say that I couldn't contribute the same or feel the same from, a spooky place, an abandoned story, a doll, you know? So I just wanted to mention that and kind of give a little bit of an ode to the power of our minds, because a lot of that is, I feel, a reflection of how powerful our mind can be, and it's widely known that we don't use all of our brain. So I can't imagine how it would be if we used all of our brain. But just the idea of energies themselves, I totally believe that through all of the rumor spreading and the kids trying to break in and other people trying to break in, that totally that place, that theater has collected over, I don't know how many years. That was over definitely over 10 years ago. So imagine, when did that playhouse stop?
Oh, it's been abandoned for years, for
Yeah.
maybe the 80s, 90s.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
in the 80s it got like a revamp, and I think it closed, I guess, as like a site or like as an operating business in 2006 officially. But before 2006, it was empty. It was abandoned. It's been planked up for years.
practically almost maybe 30 years we could round up.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, trust me when I say that, I don't think the community has abandoned it. I don't think it's like um not remarked as a landmark of the city, like as the of the town of Coconut Grove, but I think there's just so much debate revolving it. I think there's been like, as I said before, like so many talks of like demolition, repairs, like that to this day, I mean, I don't even know what has happened, but I know it's been a very deep and thorough back and forth, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm getting chills just sharing these. But um, having shared some of the local stories, I also wanted to take the opportunity this episode to share, if we've had any, personal experiences with the supernatural, or, if we know somebody who has someone close to us who has experienced it, to just kind of take a moment to share it with everybody. So I don't know, Kat, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned how, on considering what my local one was, I was already mulling over my own, and I think it's because of the idea of past lives. And so I definitely believe in past lives. I think they're a beautifully complex thing, and they help shape who you are, and they allow you to find truth, substance, and meaning in everything around and about you, because you realize that you've lived before. And I think that it's really interesting to have come to this realization today, because I I always felt this way, even in, like in dogma within the Christian church. And so when I was younger, I think my experiences were always very heightened, because I was raised by an extremely spiritual mom. And even though she was spiritual in Christianity, and she still is, like, even though she's spiritual in Christianity, she's still very spiritual, and very spiritually connected. And I think I've mentioned before how she would tell me about visions that she would have when I was just a child, and visions that she would say, like, she just trusted that she knew that these were going to manifest themselves into her life. She didn't know how or why. And it was always very, very specific what she saw. And so I was always searching for these, like searching for when I myself would become like enlightened to that level. And so that's why I started to find a lot of identity in certain things about the world that made me question, perhaps I have lived this life before. Like perhaps I've lived the life of certain types of people and of certain uh, things in life as well, because I think it extends beyond humanity, and um, and also goes into the different planes and levels of thought. Because manifesting as an animal is very, very different, and is usually to teach a lesson. And it's the way that we view animals today. Like, well, not today, but like in my life, right? The way that I view animals is that they have something to tell me, more so than that I have that I can share an experience with them, if that makes sense. And so for me, um, I would say that when I was younger, I had a lot of very, I felt I was visited by angels when I was younger, but I was also visited by demons when I was younger. And because I was an only child for the first 10 years, and then obviously like infants, around me for several more, like I couldn't share these things, and I was always very, very introverted and shy. And I remember one time trying to share one experience that I had at church. You thought, they thought you was a safe space. And so trying to share that one experience, being totally ostracized and outcast, and so realizing it's not a safe space for me to share uh what I thought were godly encounters, um, but some some people don't want to remain open, to everything that's out there, even though they're reading it in the text. And so I definitely did have my fair share of like just encounters with demons, usually very similar ones, not too far from the one that we have here with us today. I think that that image is palpable for a reason. I think we see it continually in film, in cinema, in storytelling, in the images that I can say that I've recalled in my life that have visited me, and in dreams and in nightmares. And um I couldn't tell you a specific story because I think that it's repressed memory, in all fairness. And I think sometimes those can be the most chilling parts of life. It's having a relationship to something without having the memory of the moment that ignited it. But I know that I have come face to face with these. And I think that there's something to be said too about youth and what we are aware of, and how I do think that we become this quote unquote dense over time and not at birth. I think it's something that we are taught. I think there are people on this planet who are so much more connected to the universe in its entirety than I've grown to become, and I'm working to not be. But I think that's the fear, right? Is like reverting back to that childlike awareness, which is just being aware and open to everything and being willing to ask questions to everything, not knowing whether or not it carries light or darkness, and whether or not that light or darkness is good or evil, and so yeah, so I would say for me, probably the image, an image that I can't escape. And I know that for some it might be meaningless, these images. I'm sure that there are plenty of people who associate these images with nothing but cinema, and seeing them and identifying them with a certain genre of film, but they're true. They've been studied. They show up in people's lives. They show up with purpose in the same way that we interpret tarot. They have meaning because they are demons, and they serve a purpose in what you are to receive from them. And it's always scary because it's always really massive. And as a child, I think it's interesting that it's the image that followed me because I I ended up leaving the church, and so it had nothing to do with seeing images like that. But it's interesting that as I was diving deeper, right, like reading the word, going to bed, and not being able to fall asleep because when I look up, I'm staring at that image. They would call it spiritual warfare. And so it's interesting that when you I don't want to diss in any way. This is just my truth. And so it's interesting that as I was pouring deeper into something, I was also being very clearly shown that not everything that I was reading was for my benefit. That there were still things that were restricting me and quite literally keeping me up at night. And that's how it manifested, was in this vision. So, yeah, so that's me. I think that's really interesting, and I've definitely matured, and I love horror. It's grown to become one of my favorite genres, one of my favorite genres to perform, and I think it's so interesting because it's so psychological, but it's the psychological normalcies that we all encounter that I think are the most interesting. That I know I'm not the only person who's been visited.
I like the point that you make that the younger we are, right, the more, I guess, susceptible we are to that realm, right? Um, the story that I have actually is not one that I've gone through personally, but it is one that my cousin shared with me of her own experience and what she heard when she visited another relative of ours in California. And um, basically, a lot of these ghost encounters were had by my cousin's youngest daughter. you know, and that daughter is much older now and has not had, I don't think she's had any ghost encounters like how she did when she was younger. So I think there is some truth to that, that children, they don't, they haven't been taught yet, right? So they don't question it, they just are more accepting. And there's a lot out there that says, you know, that just children are more open and able to see spirits because of that. And the stories that I have is, a simple one is one that when my cousin was there and she had visited the family that we have in California, she was there. She was kind of playing with some of our other cousins' daughters, because I believe it's a total of three of them. And the as they were getting ready to do something or play something or watch something, my cousin says that the littlest one just goes to her and asks her, would you feel weird, or would you freak out if there was an old man watching us? And my I think at that point my cousin had already heard the stories, right, of some of the ghost sightings that the youngest one has seen. So she didn't want to completely dismiss her or make her feel, you know, any sort of way. So she was just very cautiously saying like, mm, no, but why do you ask that? And she said, "Oh, okay, good, because there's a man like literally right here, and he's been watching us and like kind of been staring at us." And so my cousin kind of felt chills after hearing that. And I think that was probably the only time where she saw an older gentleman in the house. And the one that was a lot more vivid and that was a lot more frequent in the house was that apparently, I believe the cousin who lives there knew that there was something that happened to the house long, long ago. And I think she was telling my cousin who was visiting the story about it. Um, and then the youngest daughter kind of just comes out and says like, "Oh yeah, the little girl? You mean like the girl with pigtails?" And so the mom just kind of looks at her like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, like she wears pigtails, she has light hair, she has, you know, that old style when they used to wear bonnets and stuff like that, the longer dresses." And she was like, "Yes, like how like how did you know that that's what she looked like?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, like I always see her, you know, like sometimes we'll play together." And my cousins started, the oldest, you know, the mom was freaking out. She didn't really know what to do. And then my cousin had shared with me that apparently there was one time that they were like, the entire family was going to go out because my cousin was cooking something. The one who lives in LA and has the house was cooking something. She forgot an ingredient. And so they all had to go out and just buy the ingredient, right? So they had all decided to go together. So nobody was at the house. And she was cutting something up and had left the knife right on the kitchen counter next to the cutting board. When they came back from the grocery store, the knife had disappeared. It was nowhere to be seen. They looked all around the kitchen, all around the first floor. They couldn't find it anywhere. And so finally, the youngest daughter asked them, like, "Oh, like, what are you looking for?" And they're like, "Oh, we're looking for the knife." And she's like, "Oh, I know where it is." And they're like, "Okay, do you like, how do you know? Where is it?" And she's like, "Oh, the little girl took it up to the attic." And they went all the way up to the attic, and lo and behold, the knife was right there. And I think what the little girl said, the youngest daughter said, was she wanted to like play a joke or something, or was playing around. But they went all the way up there, nobody was at the house, and the knife was in the attic. And that is the closest story that I have in terms of a ghost spiritual encounter. And I remember when she told me that's the story, she had just come back from visiting this family from California too. And I think I want to say 14, 15. So that terrified me a little bit. But it was also so interesting to me because these stories can also be a little bit fun. But I think at the end of the day, the little ghost girl never actually did any harm. And now that that youngest daughter is a lot older, I haven't heard anything in terms of more, any other ghost encounters, but she definitely had a lot when she was younger. And I want to say between the ages of 6 to 8. But yeah.
I have a friend who I feel like we have just recently discussed something which I don't think it counters what we've been saying about youth and that kind of fine line between youth and death and dimensions. But it's definitely an interesting thought where he's been telling me that he knew he would see things as a kid and he would like very willingly run away from them. He would like be pleading like, please stop appearing, I don't want to see you, I don't want to see you. And I think because he was a kid, it worked, and it was kind of like this reaction to, because I mean, and I apologize for anyone who's listening who's like wackadoo, right? Wackadoo hour over here. But I genuinely do believe that there are people, right, that float and remain with us. And there are also things that, Kat was just saying, that are not human beings, but they revolve around the same sphere with us, right? And interestingly enough, he was telling me these stories that when he was a kid, it was very much other people. He was feeling other people, or at least he thought so, right? And he was running away, and he hated the fact that he could see these things. And it wasn't until fast forward to him being, well, into his adulthood, very mature, that something happened where he started seeing things again. But as a mature adult, he felt very much in control of how much he could allow. And he could actually feel the kind of reciprocation of, if he said, I know that you're here, but you can't make yourself known, I'm going to bed. And then it won't happen. And I found that to be very powerful, because I think it coincides with what we've been saying. Yes, there is the thinner veil, between this lifetime of when you're closest to death. Well, it's when you're young and you've just left that void, and it's when you're old, when you're just at the doorstep. Um, and I mean much, much older, right? But when you're young sometimes and these things will present themselves to you, you could unknowingly just think it's part of your everyday. And then there's that other part of you that knows it's not supposed to be here and will actively shut it down. Um, and who knows if it will open up again, right? So I think it's interesting, that maybe, your relative Pam has shut it down, but who knows? Like, who knows if it can present itself again? I think it all happens within reason. I think there's a reason why the sensitivities and these thinner parts of the veil happen.
Wow. And speaking of veil, when this episode comes out, it'll be, I believe it should be the day before the Hunter full moon, the super moon. And when I did some research on that full moon, it's also because it's classified as a super moon because it's the closest, right? That it can be to the earth when these supermoons happen. It's because it's really close to the earth, relatively speaking. And so because of that, that veil, right, between us and the afterlife is also one of the thinnest. So for those of you that are listening to us right now, be careful. Like
Yeah, hopefully you're not listening before bed.
yeah.
Maybe we should have said that at the beginning. Whoops.
Warning.
Hopefully this is well into your morning commute. Oh no,
Oh,
Kat, you're muted. Zoom call things.
I'm sure the title will suggest that for them.
yeah,
I
for
trust
sure.
us enough.
Yeah, I
Disclaimer.
hope so. Disclaimer, do not listen at night.
Yeah. So, well, was that yours or was there something else that you wanted to share?
Are you talking about my personal ghost
Your
story?
personal story. Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that's not what I wanted to share. But it got brought
Okay.
up just because of our conversation of, the sensitive ones, right?
Yes. Okay. So now I'm excited to hear your personal story.
Yeah, so I will definitely echo that I have a sensitive one in my family, and that coincidentally is the same cousin who introduced me to tarot. And she is exactly 10 years older than me. So when I say this, I'm not speaking about somebody who was an older cousin and was teasing me. She was much older than me. And I don't think she's ever the person to joke about these things just so because of how seriously she always held practices and beliefs. And, she herself was also raised Catholic. So, and she still practiced, right? And she still, held ceremonies and had Samhain, right? Which is like, you know, one of the origin theories of Halloween, right? So anyway, this same cousin, she was very sensitive, uh, as long as I've known her, right? When she was maybe about 7 years old, she started telling stories about things that she would see because everything before that was kind of things that she just thought was part of her natural world. But when she was around 7, she started realizing, oh, not everyone can see what I'm seeing. So she would vocalize it. And, she started vocalizing the fact that she could see her great grandmother. And it was just a dinner conversation where people were talking about the great grandmother and how much, like, oh, she would have loved this, or, like, you made this so great. And it was about the meal, right? Like they were talking about this is what she would love to eat, blah, blah, blah. And my cousin, like just kind of blurted out, like, is that the woman in the rocking chair? And her grandmother, right? So the daughter of the deceased one they're talking about, was like, yeah, that was her rocking chair. She'd always sit there. That's why we moved it to your nursery because we know, like, and by the way, this great grandmother died just before my cousin was born. Um, and they were just saying, yeah, that's why we moved her rocking chair into your nursery to kind of commemorate, like, she would have loved to have met you. And my cousin just says, yeah, like she's been with me the whole time. That evolved into, her like depicting memories that there was a woman watching her in her crib for as long as she can remember. She could have very vivid memories of this old woman speaking to her, singing a lullaby to her that she recited, and her grandmother was looking at her like, terrified, by the way, with no explanation as to how she would have known those things. She recited like memories of other things being around her grandmother too. Like there was this kind of Indian statue that was in her nursery just because when my cousin was born, my aunt and uncle were kind of in a starter home transition. Like they had just bought a home, but it wasn't theirs quite yet. So they were staying like with the grandmother. So her nursery was in there along with all the other knickknacks that her grandmother had, right? And there was this Indian statue that was like, I don't know, maybe 3 inches tall, right? And she says, no, no, no. That was the man that would be next to my grandmother. And he was dancing. And she was pointing at the statue. He's like, yeah, like he's a man that dances with my grandmother. That's what she would say. And this kind of evolved because she's like, no, 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 he doesn't dance anymore, but he did. So it was very obvious that this, my cousin, everyone in the family just kind of agreed, like, okay, she can see things. It's just accepted, right? And they wouldn't really touch it. They wouldn't really do much besides warn my cousin, like, you have to be careful because they're Catholic, right? And Catholics, as Kat said, they do believe, right, that there are souls and there are spirits and there are saints that guide us and all these things. So they do believe in this presence, even if they won't call it like ghosts or whatever. Um, So they told her, like, you have to be careful. So they embedded this belief with her that, you can't just talk to anybody you see. You have to make sure that, you're safe. If it's not, if it's not, if it's not abuelita, which is they would call like her great grandmother, you have to be careful. Just like you don't talk to anybody you don't know. So it was very much like, well, at least let's install some stranger danger into her. So that was her kind of upbringing, right? And her kind of vocalizing all the things that she had seen, even from like a crib, right? Memory. Fast forward to, I'm born much, much later, right? We pretty much grew up together, and we had summers together a lot of the time, right? Even when I was in middle school, I would always spend a lot of my summer weekends, right, with my cousins, even if I had summer camp. And if I didn't have summer camp, I'd even spend more time with them. I'd be there basically for months, right? And there was this family tradition that we'd always go to Marco Island. And by the way, this family, a lot of them lived right next to each other. So it was almost an entire block that was empty because everybody was in Marco Island, right? And there was one year that I stayed with my cousins, kind of house sitting, because we were waiting for my cousin to finish kind of a full week at work before we drove to Marco Island right for the weekend. So I was staying with them. We were at the same time house sitting for everybody. So we would pop in, make sure plants are watered, nothing's on, right, and leave. And I remember we went to get dinner. And by the way, the block is empty. There's nobody there. It's just me and my cousin and her sister, which is also my cousin. But anyway, we're not going to put that person into the story because too many cousins. So we went to get dinner. We come back. She's driving, she's of age. And um, she drove a van, like a Chevrolet van, right? And I go to slide the door open to get out, and my cousins aren't leaving the car, and I'm out of the car, and I'm like, "What are we doing? Hello?" And they just look straight ahead, and they tell me, "Tess, get back in the car." And I was like, "Okay." And they said, "Don't touch the door." I was like, "Okay." And it was thankfully, the vans by that time already had like that automated button and the doors closed. So that's what happened. And we're sitting there, and I'm like, all right, is anybody gonna tell me what's going on? And my cousin's like, just sit tight. Okay. And my anxiety kind of grew. I was like, I didn't really feel like I had an explanation. I didn't know what was going on. And then I looked, out the window, because what else is there to do? And the mailbox that is of my cousin's house tilts. And this is a mailbox, by the way, that's on, I think, right, a sturdy piece of metal, right, and wood. And I look over, and my cousin's like, "Don't say anything." I was like, "Okay." And she basically had us sit there in silence, and I was kind of scared, but I was looking just like around the van, and um the mailbox that was like on this, like the coily metal that is really notorious in Miami. It was bending like the other way, and I was kind of thinking like, oh, is the wind that strong? Like, did it just pick up in the last like 2 minutes? And my cousin all of a sudden says, all right, we should get inside the house now. So, we remove ourselves from the van, go into the main house, right, where we were all staying. And I'm inside, and I'm like, all right, so can I have an explanation now? And she basically told me there was something in the streets. I didn't really know what it was, but it was a group of things running from house to house, and they were jumping back and forth in the backyard or the front yards. And I was like, did they hit the mailbox? And she was like, yeah, but I didn't want you to comment on it because one of them was staring right at you through the window of the van. Like, they hit it and kind of went up to the van to see if I would react. And I was like, well, I'm not sleeping tonight. And my cousin was like, no, it's fine. They're gone. Like, it's not going to happen again. And I was like, I know you and I know what you're doing. You're just saying that to make me feel better. And she's like, well, I think so. So, and, uh, and I pretty much like stayed up all night. All the house lights were on. She left them on for me. She closed like all the curtains because she told me like, I don't want you to stare at the glass thinking that something's watching you. And I was like, okay. She pretty much reassured me many times. She's like, it's gone, Tess. I tell you, I tell you, I tell you. I don't believe her, by the way, to this day. I don't think she was telling me the truth. I think she definitely, which is her wisdom, right, as well, that she always disclose things at the right time, because um giving any fuel to kind of the awareness of the thing right there kind of heightens their presence and will draw them back every time. It's like an opening for them, like, oh, you see me, like, or you can see what I'm doing, so I'm gonna do it again, right? And I even asked her, like, well, what did they look like? And she said shadows with sharp teeth. I was like, okay. She didn't tell me that until the next day, where we got up early, we left to Marco Islands, and then she told me that, and I was like, all right, now I'm sleeping in the car because I haven't slept all night. So I slept that whole drive to Marco Island, and I got there and I was like, yay, Marco Island. I can forget about all that nasty stuff in Westchester. But yeah, I am laughing so much because the story always makes me very nervous. Um
Oh my
I
gosh.
yeah, I really like, this is my story. This is my one story that I'll always tell about two people that's like, I always believed my cousin, I never really doubted that she had these sensitivities, but it just becomes more apparent. And I think the older I got, the more she was kind of understanding, like, okay, I can respect it, right? And I know how to respect it. So she was more forthcoming. But yeah, like, I think if not that same year, the year after, she told me stories of how many people like she has seen just cross the front yard. And she's like, yeah, like there's been a lot of weekends that you've been here, and there have been like two men just standing in the hallway, and they're just there. And by the way, she's seeing these things very late at night because she was a night owl. She would be up like at 11 and down by like 4 a.m. Like she was up late. Not to really do anything, just because that was just her work schedule, honestly. So yeah, she all of my experiences have definitely, the thinnest of the veil that I've felt has definitely been like in her home, like in Westchester, um, in the heart of the suburbs of Westchester. And that was probably the most intense feeling. And honestly, the most, like, I just felt so impressed with how instantaneous like her sister was to her, like, I guess, feeling, because they didn't even need to communicate. Like they both just like sat in the van and like looked straight ahead, and they knew what was going on. And I was the one that was like slowly catching up. So it's like a terribly frightening memory, but it's also with incredible respect. And I'm like, wow, they just synced like so fast. So that's me. I hope everybody sleeps well tonight.
I I'm literally I have this giant window from my balcony, and my curtain's a little open, and I'm just like staring at the window, checking to
Girl.
see if something's gonna come out. And you've told me this story, but I don't think I remember the part where you mentioned that like there was one of them right up against the van or like the car
Yeah.
window to see if you were looking at them.
It is a very sensitive detail.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when as you were like talking and you said that they were like small people, what popped up in my head, um, the little kid from Nightmare Before Christmas who has like the hockey mask with like weird teeth. That's what popped into my head. So as soon as you said like small shadows with sharp teeth, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good visual.
Wow. Okay. I'm definitely not gonna be able to sleep tonight. I'm gonna sleep with my lights on.
We need to watch some Bluey after this.
Yes. Bluey for the soul.
That's amazing. Oh,
Oh
Bluey.
man. Yeah. Um, what was that? What was it that I wanted to mention? Well, I can't
I
remember now. Uh-huh.
I had a question while you try and remember, Pam, when because I should have stopped and asked you when I started talking about it, but you had such a reaction when I said, that I was going to talk about the Coconut Grove like playhouse. Do you have any like context with it, or are you just like, yeah, I've heard about it?
No, I didn't know anything about that playhouse.
No. Kat, did you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's as you said, it's a historic site in the city. And I both have lived adjacent to Coconut Grove for many years, slash, am also an artist. And so I know about all of the contentions right now and for the past 10 years about what to do at the Playhouse, that it is dilapidated, but it's also a historic site. And the biggest thing lately is just that they want to develop it into another mega mall, or potentially use it as a parking lot. And so it's insane that somewhere with so much culture and history, because aside from the countless people who have um, had encounters there because of dark energies that have been there, it's also just like the amount of stars today and the stars of yesterday who have performed on that stage, either in music or in performance, is astounding, which also means that there were a lot of drugs that happened in that place, so like a lot of experiences just with misuse have happened there. And so there is a lot of history, but I didn't know any specific stories, to be honest. I was just really excited because I figured that there are a lot of really good ones.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely a lot of good ones of like just again because there's lots of high schools in that area. Most of them are private, but still teenagers are teenagers. It's
Yeah,
like
no, you brought me back to breaking into homes when I was a teenager.
there you go.
Yep, with my neighbors, like walking around and then finding that there was an abandoned house, which happened to be one of the biggest houses on the corner. And I did have a super scary experience because I think that there was a squatter in the house. And as a kid, we were like, it's a ghost. Like, it's a ghost. It's a spirit. That shit, get us out of there. But I think in reality that there was probably a squatter in the house in the middle of Kendall Lakes. And like when we heard that like shattering and everything, like hey, based on everything that we've talked about today, anything is possible because I didn't see anybody. Um, but my mind wants to tell me that it was probably a squatter. I don't know what would be scarier.
That's true. I think
If it's that
encountering a
all of
squatter is
us
pretty cool.
heard a vision, or if it's that it was somebody real, not real, but like somebody in the same world as us, who was using it as a home to squat in. Pam, did you ever go to that abandoned house with us?
I do not think so.
No? Okay. Right. Consider yourself lucky.
I feel like because my family was spiritual, right, in our unique Japanese way, um, I don't, it's interesting because I don't think it was directly described or understood in my family specifically as ghosts. It was more the idea of spirits, right? And that kind of connotation and context of it. Um, but I think that because of that, right? And the idea that, like we had altars for deceased family members. for my grandpa, my grandma has a room where it's like a picture of him, and whenever we come to visit, we'll light an incense just to say hello, let him know that we're here, you know. And I do have a memory when I was in Peru when I was younger. I believe my memory says that it was one of my father's family homes. When I asked my parents about it, they tell me it was from my mother's side, but I distinctly remember the images of an older woman who I think was my grandmother on my dad's side, and also a set of twins that passed away, and they just had an altar of like the twins and then, you know, the woman. Um, and I remember the house was a little bit older, you know, because third world country. Also, Peru has a lot of humidity, so things tend to wear down a lot more, and they don't have central AC or central heating, so there's not a controlled environment, and so a lot of those buildings get weathered pretty easily. Um, but I vaguely and distinctly remember feeling super creeped out, you know, and that could have easily just been me being little and being creeped out by these really old photos, because I feel like those must have been pictures when they were more Japanese, you know, and had that traditional style, or like that old style when the Japanese were starting to um what's the word? I guess trying to adapt more, you know, assimilate into the more Western society and that kind of clothing. But I do remember feeling a really weird, creepy feeling, you know, and because that house specifically, I do remember was very much an altar space, kind of like how they do in, if you look up, I'm sure if you look up Shinto relative altars or something like that anywhere online, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. Um, and they would try, of course, to tell me to light the incense for them, but because I didn't know them, you know, I didn't have any relation to them. We didn't really have a lot of stories based off of them. To me, they were strangers, so it felt a little weird to do that, and I was a little bit creeped out. Um, but yeah, I forgot what I was going with. Um,
She's stuck in the creeps. She's
I
stuck in it.
know.
She's
Like
remembering how it made her feel.
I'm still feeling the little shadow people.
Oh, from Tessa's story, yeah.
Yeah. Um
Talk about writing a, well, I know that's actually a huge can of worms that you would have to open to write about that, but there's definitely a bigger story there.
yeah.
I'll leave it at
For
that.
sure. Yeah. It might not even be mine to say, but yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, that's why I was like, big can of worms, big can of
Yeah.
worms. But grateful
Um
for what you shared today.
yeah. So thank you guys for sharing. I've been mulling over, you know, as we've been talking, what I could potentially ask the tarot cards tonight, and I
Woo!
will be using
Oh
something
my God,
that we have
my bar
mentioned in
is
the past.
exposed.
Oh, it's okay.
You didn't see it. You didn't see it.
Um,
All my potions, actually.
your potions, yes.
Patience.
Yeah, because you're an apothecary.
I mean,
Um,
essentially.
mhm. So I am using the Moonlight's browser-based tarot deck today. And I have been trying to think about what I could potentially ask the cards tonight. And we've shared a lot of stories, you know, of our encounters with the supernatural, whether they be personal or not. We've also shared some of the local folklore and some of the local stories that are in our neck of the woods. And one of the things that kind of popped into my head was when we were talking about the thinning of the veil, right? Especially because when this episode comes out, it's going to be the day before the super full moon. And so one of the things that I thought about to ask the cards as they're shuffling is, you know, what is something to kind of be aware of, right? As we've all shared personally, we all do believe in these spirits and in these energies, and as we've mentioned, as there are good energies, there are also evil energies. And so as enticing as it might feel to want to explore, if you heard our stories and you want to take a look into that Coconut Grove playhouse or any other thing, right, in your area, I think it's also important to remember that at the end of the day, a lot of these things could be outside of our control, and it would be really, how do I want to describe this? I don't want to say egotistical, but that feels right. To just think that you're above it, right? And so because there's going to be such a thinning of the veil when this episode comes out, and because it's just Halloween in general, right? We're coming up on some. Tess had mentioned a holiday, saw him, right? Is that how you say it?
Samhain.
Samhain, thank you. So it's a lot of this time of the year, there's a lot of the idea and the concept of that thinning the veil and holidays and religious practices, spiritual practices, cultural practices that revolve around um the other realm. And so one of the things that I thought about asking the tarot is, what are some things to keep in mind, right? Maybe what are some precautions that we should take, any sort of thing, advice that they might have for us, warnings, uh whatever it is that they might have of any intrusive thoughts that may come to us during this time. And I also do want to acknowledge that there are cultures and practices out there, right, that do practice um celebrating, right, the spirits and those that are in that spiritual realm, right? One of the ones that I can think of right now is the Day of the Dead in Mexico. And so how can we do this sort of respectfully, right? And some of the things to kind of keep in mind if you did want to um dip your toes into some supernatural connections or anything like that, things to keep in mind, just to kind of keep with what we've been talking about today. So I'm going to go ahead. You know what? I don't know what spread this is going to give me, so let's find out. Okay. Let's see. No, I want this one. And okay. So it gave me a 3-card spread. It classifies them as persona, obstacle, and solution. I may or may not use that depending on what comes up. But let's go ahead and see the 3 cards that we have. So the first card that came out is the Ace of Cups in reverse. And as I've mentioned before, the neat thing about this web browser app software program is that it does give you some notes. So some of the notes that it has here for Ace of Cups in reverse, it says the brink, wellspring of emotion, new feelings, and visceral. After that, we have the Fool card in the middle, which of course, we've talked about it before: leap of faith, spontaneity, unknown lands, release of fear. And then for the solution, or the third card that came up here, is the World card, but in reverse. And here it says tapping into network, broadening horizons, look around you, and adventure. I kind of want to pull, if it lets me, on the side, another card. Okay. So with the cards that came up, I feel like I am going to use the spread that came up, persona, obstacle, and solution. And for persona, what's kind of coming out here to me is, for some of us that are listening to this episode at the time that you're listening to this, there might be a personal reason, right, why you might feel inclined or excited, or whatever emotions you may have, to tap into the spiritual realm and explore whatever it is that you're searching, or whatever it is that's calling to you. But I also think it's important to note that the Ace of Cups is here, but it's also here in reverse, right? So when I see the kind of notes that it has here in terms of the brink, wellspring of emotion, I feel like where we are at emotionally and mentally may not be the right time, and almost to be careful to look into that, because what could be driving that could very well just be maybe unprocessed emotions, right? And just looking at the Ace of Cups in reverse, usually, upright, it looks like such a beautiful opportunity. But here I almost see, upside down, it looks like the bird is flying into the cup to grab this cross symbol. And I feel like some of the things that we were all kind of sprinkling and mentioning, and Kat and Tess, because they were also raised more religiously, what kind of comes out to me is this idea of blind faith, right? Blind belief, and almost like going into things blindly, because this bird is just going straight for this coin thing that's at the top of the cup, and it's going straight into the cup and doesn't even notice that it's a cup, right? Like once the bird flies into that, it's gonna crash into it. And the water is also, because it's in reverse, it looks like it's flowing in reverse, right? So to me, it's almost like it could feel enticing, but really take a moment to think about it. And the reason why I say that is because the Fool card is here. It's the only one that is upright of all the cards that I've pulled. And even though the Fool is usually a card that showcases, right, you should be taking a leap of faith, or or there is a sort of spontaneity and beauty that comes with his naiveness, it's also this idea of be careful of what you're jumping into sometimes, right? Because we have the dog here. A lot of the narrative that comes with this card is that the dog may be warning the Fool that he's about to jump off a cliff because he's just so blissfully looking up at the sky, right? So I think it's almost warning us against this blissful ignorance, kind of the idea that I was mentioning before, that um don't think don't let this naivety of the unknown and what you don't know about it think that you're immune to the consequences of those interactions, right? So whatever it is that you're planning on doing, whether it be tarot, whether it be some other form of divination, or speaking to the supernatural, or even exploring these areas, like, take precaution, because what could be driving you is just blind emotion, or maybe even blind faith. And I think it is healthy to question some aspects, just to make sure that whatever it is that you're following is in alignment with what you truly want, right? Because even as we've mentioned in some of the stories that we've talked about, you don't know if what's calling you could be something good or could be something evil. So really take that moment to dissect where this yearning is coming from. For those of us who may be feeling it, is this something that's really going to be good for us? um, if you think that it is, then make sure you do your due diligence to do some research on whatever it is that you're trying to go to, or you're trying to practice. And then the solution we have here,
Well, wait, Pam,
it's
before you move on to the next card, I
uh-huh
wanted to bring it back because just to add to what your interpretation is, and um Kat, I don't know if this is your experience, but in Catholicism, right, you have communion, and that's where you accept the body of Christ. And it's funny that you said that that dove, right, and that coin has you thinking of blind faith, because this is kind of very much evoking the ceremony of communion to me. The actual bread of Christ looks like that. It's a little chip, very plain, and it's made of actual bread, and it has a cross on it. And the dove is also a symbol of Christianity. And there's also the blood of Christ. So you accept the blood of Christ, you accept the body of Christ, and that is communion. So it's very kind of chilling that you kind of saw that religious kind of acceptance of faith when this kind of evokes one of the most important kind of thresholds of accepting, Catholicism, right, as a faith, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Um, I mean, even as you were saying that, I kind of see like the hand is white and it's glowing, but the cloud isn't, right? It's an outline. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily this evil thing that's calling towards you, right? But just take that moment to take a step back. Don't be the dove who only sees the chip or the pentacle or the coin or whatever it is that you see. Um, but make sure you take that step back and see if that whole cup and the way that it's flowing and all of that really fits with who you are. Because um another thing that I want to mention is the Fool is pretty much the first card, right, in the hero's journey and in the journey that follows through the major arcana of the tarot. And it's if you look through and follow the story of the major arcana, it essentially follows the hero's journey and this idea of how the hero or the Fool kind of finds himself, right? And kind of all of the obstacles that he goes through with as you go through in the order of the major arcana, you'll notice that. And the last card in the major arcana is the world card. And here it shows up, but it shows up upside down and in reverse. And some of the key terms that they have here is tapping into network, broadening horizons, look around you, adventure. So I think it's very indicative to this idea of not necessarily, for those of you who take it that way, in terms of tapping into network, you might translate that for yourself as tapping into the otherworldly, right? Or tapping into that realm. But I think what really is important to highlight here is this idea of looking around, broadening those horizons. And at the end of the day, the world card is there. Like what still shows up here is this cycle, right? Like the person that is in this depiction is surrounded by a circular wreath. And at the top and at the bottom of the wreaths, there's almost an infinity symbol. It's a ribbon that kind of ties them, but it looks like the infinity symbol. And so for me, it's kind of showing like maybe you have to turn your world upside down, right? Question a lot of what you've known, question what's calling you, and kind of think critically, right? And I think this is something that is just important to have in general, questioning whatever you receive, period, whether it's in work, whether it's in school, whether it's advice that you're being given, right? Like who's giving this to me? The world card has a lion, has, I think that's a bull, an eagle, an actual person. So where's this information coming from? Like who's giving this to me? Kat mentioned that she also finds that animals are important ways of communication for her from the other side. Is there something that's trying to communicate with you? Why? Like don't just go in and automatically think, oh my God, you know, I have to go take a deep dive into this practice that I don't necessarily know about. But if it is calling to you for a reason, just take that moment to do that research, right? And understand where could this be coming from, or even if it has to do with religion, and those of you who may be questioning it, kind of use this time to really discover everything that's around you, learn from the world that is around you. And here, the clarifying card that I pulled up is the Nine of Pentacles, but in reverse. And some of the keywords that show up here are reaping rewards, self-reliant, enjoying your luck, independently resourceful. So even though the Nine of Pentacles is in reverse, it still keeps a lot of the same ideology as it would be upright, right? Because the Nine of Pentacles comes in a place where this person is standing and seeing everything that they've tried so hard to grow, right? All the cards that lead up to this card are people who are working hard and working on a pentacle and watching and waiting for it to grow and waiting to see what's going to grow from their harvest. And the Nine of Pentacles just kind of stands there and sees what it is that they've created, you know, and basically have brought into fruition. And even though this is in reverse, a lot of that terminology is still in here in terms of what it could mean. And so because it is in reverse, I feel like those of you who are listening, maybe you're not quite there yet, but that doesn't mean you're super far, right? Like there is a reason for everything that happens. And maybe if you're trying to figure out what is the reason that you're feeling this type of way, that you're feeling that you should start questioning things that you've known for so long, it's because you know that deep inside, this is what you deserve, right? You deserve to be standing in a place where all the decisions that you make are for yourself. And what really pops out to me is these two: self-reliant and independently resourceful. It's this idea of the self, of me, and this is who I am. And because we have the Fool here in the obstacle, and I have the Nine of Pentacles in reverse as like a clarification card, to me, it sounds like whatever this is, and whoever's listening to this right now, it's completely a journey of self-discovery, right? And whether that may mean tapping into the supernatural or looking at other religions or spiritual beliefs, right? Because not everything is technically a religion. There are some other belief systems out there that are a lot more on the spiritual side. And I think that the cards are trying to encourage us to proceed cautiously, right? Make sure that you're smart about what it is that you're doing. You're not just diving deep into that, because if you look at the Fool, okay, if he looks up and only looks up, he sees a beautiful sunshine. But look at his background. Those are some sharp mountains. Those are some high mountains with snowy peaks. And he may look like he's not on snow, but that's a pretty craggly cliff that he's kind of almost leaping off of, you know. And if that dog wasn't there, again, talking about animals and maybe some ways that they can communicate some signs to us, that dog is there to kind of bark at him and tell him like, hey, go look at your footing, go take a look at what you're stepping into. You're about to step into a giant chasm and die to your death, you know. So I also want to say that for those of you who have been following along to our episodes and have listened to our tarot episode, these are some of the ways that even though most of the time the Fool card can indicate a lot of new opportunities and a moment to take a leap of faith, it's also important to see what position it's in. And because the Fool came out in the obstacle position, that's why I'm saying, you know, for those of you who might be thinking, oh, this is so contrary to what you've said in the past with the Fool card, because I feel like we have gotten this card before, because it's in the obstacle position, it that's how it transforms, right? That definition of the Fool and the message that it's trying to give. So in this context, it is very much giving us a warning into blissful ignorance, into thinking that things will just be okay because we believe it to be so. You know, like take that moment to really explore, really question, do your research. um and because Tess did mention the tie to Catholicism and how it looks like the body of Christ chip bread thing, for some of you who are listening, it could be a calling to question some long-term beliefs that you have had, right? And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. You know, Kat has very graciously shared parts of her journey of that with us. And it's definitely led her to who she is today. And I can, as a friend of hers, you know, I now know that because of that journey, she is that much more firm and has a lot more confidence and is able to stand up um for the things that she believes in, because now she knows them to be true, right? And her truths and things that she can advocate 100% for, because she's already gone through that journey and doesn't have to question it anymore. So for those of you who are starting your journey, it seems like with this tarot read, who are maybe have already started but are in the midst and see other things that are pulling you or calling towards you, you know, Not to say to ignore them completely, just make sure that you tread very carefully. But just know that at the end of the day, because the Nine of Pentacles is here and the World card as well, these are two very good omens. And we have Pentacle energy, we have two major arcanas. So this is going to be something that takes a while, and something that is going to be very substantial and shaping, right? So take the time, do not rush it, and just give yourself the grace that you will need as you go on through this journey, because it's not going to be easy, right? The Fool is here on top of these mountains. He's going to have to get down somehow with whatever he has in his little pack and the flower that he's holding. So it won't be easy, but it'll definitely be worth it. So I think that is what the cards have for us tonight. And before closing, do either of you ladies have any other comments or things you'd like to share? Zoom.
Just Zoom things,
Well, I would love to just thank everybody for tuning in for our spooky hour or so. And just want to wish everybody super spooky rest of October. And really, I hope that our episode today was able to help you kind of tune into it, especially the things that we shared about our childhood. I feel like we did a lot of nostalgic reminiscing, searching through our memories and kind of going back to our younger years a little bit. Maybe can help you bring back some of that spirit to this season, because I think it definitely did for me. Like living vicariously through both of you, the stories that both of you ladies shared and that of your family members as well, just reminds me of how we've talked about the magic of childhood before, and I think that part of the magic is also in the first fears that you develop as a kid. So I hope that what we experience, we can also give to you guys who listened. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, there's kind of this glee that comes with being scared, I think, because of our kids and ourselves. There's a glee when we're like, oh my God. I mean, of course it bleeds into oh my God. But its origin comes from a very familiar place, and just to add to what Pam's tarot spread is, like there's a reason why that first card was in persona, like I feel like honestly my faith that I grew up in, set a very firm foundation, that maybe in somebody else it would have canceled these things out, but for me and in my own environment, I think it opened up a lot more. And I don't think either or is like wrong or right. I think both are come back to the same foundation that you are aware and believe and put some credit into more than just physical beings on this earth, and that wouldn't have been possible without that persona placement, that communion looking card being there. So there's a reason why it was there, right? And not an obstacle. I don't think that's your obstacle. I think that's actually a foundation that you're going to be returning to help you with this journey. Yeah.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much for sharing your spooky creepypasta stories with us. And for those of you listening, I hope you also tune in to our next episode, because we do have an exciting guest that will appear. So look forward to that. And and also look forward to the supermoon tomorrow. And we look forward to being with you guys and sharing our next episode with you. So until then, have a spooky Halloween.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Don't talk to
Stay
strangers.
spoopy.